he's like, he appreciates the amount of time it takes them, but he's a bit dismissive about, you know, what it is that they do. But he wouldn't, I don't think he'd feel comfortable if his sexuality was discussed in that way. And so I think, like all people, he's a bit of a hypocrite. We can always see it when it's happening to us, and it's a little bit harder to see when we're doing it to other people.
He himself is a narcissist, but he still has enough awareness to know
that it's not okay to be a narcissist.
Right.
I mean, can you really be a narcissist if you know it's not okay to be a narcissist?
That's a good question. Can you be a narcissist if you know it's not okay? We are in Libraria, an independent bookshop in East London, and I am with somebody I'm going to allow to introduce themselves, and we'll be talking about Andy Warhol's Fame, curated by Penguin Books.
I'm Dami. I am 27. I am an avid reader, and I'm a big fan of Andy Warhol, in particular, because I studied art.
Okay, so so Andy Warhol Fame. So Andy Warhol becomes a famous artist in America in the 60s. Yeah. My thing is that I don't actually very much like Andy Warhol because I think he took advantage of a couple of people, notably Basquiat. Now, he doesn't mention that kind of situation in the book, no. But what do you think about him as a character in the 60s?
I guess partly it's a little bit, Andy Warhol changes a little bit after the 60s. So he becomes significantly more commercial, and that is something he gets a lot of criticism for. So by the time you kind of get to Andy Warhol in the 70s, you do get that sort of relationship he's having with other artists like Basquiat and whatever, because of the success he's had, the commercial success he's had, which is quite unusual for an artist.
Yeah.
But then you also have to remember that Andy Warhol didn't start out as an artist. He was working in marketing.
Okay.
And he's probably always been a little bit more interested in that commerciality than is normal for an artist.
Okay.
I don't think he'd have done Starving Artist well, if that makes sense. So yes, I think there's some things that are problematic about Andy Warhol, but I mean his commerciality is probably the least of those things, if we're being honest. But in terms of sort of creating a whole genre of art and sort of making marketing art, he's kind of, you know, he is the goat in that is his space, and he gets his flowers for that, if nothing else.
Okay, so I think all of that is true, and I think the unique thing about this book is the fact that we're talking about the 60s. So obviously it's post-war, we've had a baby boom in the 50s, and now the 60s becomes this kind of center of optimism and kind of cultural creation, at least in terms of commerce.
Yeah.
And you know, the television show Mad Men kind of symbolizes that and shows the different ways that kind of this new age of commerce is coming through with airlines and Americans traveling and so on. So it makes sense for pop art to have
the influence of that.
Especially during this time. And in one of our other videos we talked about the Beat Generation, who took a political stance on the things that were going on in terms of Vietnam and Stop the War. And of course then there was the civil rights movement happening at the same time. So there's a lot of things going on. But how do you feel about the idea of an icon, of a celebrity, like in that time? Yeah.
So in the book he describes something that's really interesting, and he describes this idea of beauty and fame. So it's in Beauty and Fame. He describes this idea of beauty and fame being kind of fake in itself as a concept, right? So he talks about how we all have these fantasies, and we chase this fantasy. So people have these fantasies when they're young about, you know, what beautiful looks like, or what, you know, what cool looks like. And they get older, and I'm guessing, you know, you're a kid in the 50s, and you get to you sort of come of age in that 60s space. And he was talking about how actually everything is a knockoff of the decade or so before, or the few decades before, because everyone is trying to live out that fantasy they had when they were younger. And actually, by the time you touch anything, you're touching this sort of, I don't know, just fake watered down version of it, and nothing is really that real. and it's really weird because I think he bounces between the two over and over in the book. He bounces between this idea of like fame, beauty, all of that. It's not that real. But then there's this desperation from him that you could feel. He wants to be beautiful. He wants to be famous.
Absolutely.
And he wants it, but then he sort of mocks it, and it's like he can't decide where he really stands on that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost because he can tell it's not cool to want it, but he still wants it.
Right.
Yeah, and so
it's
strange.
This was my issue. It was like he was being a bit of a hypocrite, wasn't he? Because there's a point in the book where he says that this thing about fame becomes a problem, right? You need, like, celebrities need to have a product that is not just you.
Yeah.
The moment that you become a product, he's saying, is that you become a narcissist, right?
Yeah.
So the focus should be on talent and about what is being created and what the output is. Fine.
Yeah.
But he sounds so narcissistic. Like, how do you kind of marry those things together?
How do you marry
because
the two
he
things?
himself is a narcissist, but he still has enough awareness to know
that it's not okay to be a narcissist.
Right.
I mean, can you really be a narcissist if you know it's not okay to be a narcissist?
That's a good question. Can you be a narcissist if you know it's not okay? I don't know.
Because I think, in a weird way, I think he's on the way to being a narcissist.
Yeah.
He is famous enough and, you know, popular enough and all of that. I actually think, in a weird way, he's right. You need to have something you're selling. It can't be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You either need to have art or something. He's like, you need to be able to count what it is that you're putting into the world that is getting you the money you're getting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am putting these many shoes or whatever it is that you're counting. And that makes sense. And I think for him, in his head, as he wrote that, he could count pieces of art or whatever it is that he's putting into the world. So, but also there came a point where what Andy Warhol was selling is that he's Andy Warhol. He didn't necessarily have to put the art out there.
Right.
And
Right.
that's the weird thing about fame.
Yeah.
Whether or not you have the product and you get the fame for the right reason. People who get famous for no reason will probably lose their mind way faster than people who get famous for something that they're doing that's keeping you productive, that you have to get up and do and produce.
Yeah, this is what they say about child actors and
exactly.
things. Yeah.
So like you have to have something that you're getting up and doing in the morning, otherwise with that amount of fame and money you will go mad. But the thing that I think is sort of the catch-22 about fame is the more of it you get, the less that product will matter.
Right.
Right? And there's very little you can control about that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
There's always this thing that people say is that famous people always say, I don't care about fame, you know, money's better than fame, and so on and so forth. I always wonder whether they can see the issue with the statement. The issue is, we're only listening to you because you're famous. If you weren't famous, we wouldn't be able to hear you say
You don't care about
you don't care about fame. Fame is not important.
Yeah.
If fame really isn't important to you, then why do you do interviews in magazines? Why do you accept awards at award shows and so on and so forth?
Yeah.
It feels like there's a kind of disingenuousness going on about the value of fame, because I think, you know, I can only think of one profession in which it's not advantageous to be well known. Only one.
And that's being a spy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Straight away,
No.
got it, straight, one.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
it.
That's the
only one.
Advantage. So he does it throughout the book, doesn't he? He says that, you know, fame doesn't matter. He talks about, so there's a bit where he says the only thing that's good about being famous is that when you read magazines about famous people, you know the people in it.
Right.
And it makes for really interesting reading.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I mean, actually, it's probably more interesting if you don't know the people in it, because I wouldn't read a book about the people I know and whatever it is they're getting up to.
Right.
So it's not like I didn't buy it. I don't buy it. That's not the best thing about being famous. And in other places, he says other little things that make you know that he cares about being famous. He talks about, you know, leaving really fancy food out for the homeless, and, you know, and like liking the idea of being back in his house, losing weight. So he talks about dieting by going to really fancy restaurants, buying really fancy food, pushing it around his plate for a little bit, and then getting it packed up. And and then putting it out on the street for a homeless person to find, right? And like he likes to go home, think about all the weight he's losing, and how, you know, this homeless person has found this really fancy dish, and like how this homeless person might not even appreciate it and prefer to pick bread out of the bin or something. And I just thought, oh my god, like, if he wrote that on Twitter, he'd be so cancelled.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I think he's I think he's struggling to admit to himself how much fame is actually the only thing that makes him relevant.
Okay.
And I think he's also quite insecure. He's uncomfortable with himself, and you see that lots of different ways.
Yeah, he's aware that he's not the most talented person in the world.
Or the most handsome.
Right.
He talks about how other people are more handsome than him.
Yeah, he's ugly. She's ugly.
And he talks about like there's a weird bit where he talks about being in bed with this woman and she's talking about this other guy and how much she like dislikes him and how ugly he is, and he's thinking he looks a bit like that guy.
Yeah.
I was just like, that's so awkward.
Right.
And so I do think he's very self-aware, or rather very.
That's one of the
very
big things.
Uncomfortable with himself.
Right.
And I think he thinks fame makes up for that.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't want to admit it.
Okay. There's a lovely quote. Someone said to me that they have in high society. They say it's lonely at the top, but the food's good. Because
that sounds like I want to be at the top. I'm wherever the food is good.
So this is the thing. So for example, so I'm quoting from I'm reading from page 55. He says, models can sometimes be very rude because they get paid by the hour and put in their 8-hour day. When they go home, they think that they should still be getting paid. Movie stars get millions of dollars for nothing, so when someone asks them to do something for nothing, they go crazy. They think that if they're going to talk to somebody at the grocery store, they should get $50 an hour. And obviously, this is why we appreciate celebrities who seem down to earth, like, you know, people like relatable people. So he's aware that all of this is going on. He sees the issues, but he kind of replicates that in his life, and I can't get over it. Yeah.
I think that's easy to explain for me. I think people are hypocrites.
Yeah.
Okay. Like,
okay.
I think it's really, really easy to be like, you know, I mean, he talks about lots of other things. He talks about like animal rights. He is a homosexual man. And the way he talks about drag queens in his book, not appropriate or acceptable.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, he probably would feel really uncomfortable talking about anyone else talking about homosexuals in the way he did.
Okay.
About drag queens.
Yeah.
And he said something about like, I think it's like self-destructive and a futile way to use your time or something like that. He's like, he appreciates the amount of time it takes them, but he's a bit dismissive about, you know, what it is that they do. But he wouldn't, I don't think he'd feel comfortable if his sexuality was discussed in that way. And so I think, like all people, he's a bit of a hypocrite. We can always see it when it's happening to us, and it's a little bit harder to see when we're doing it to other people.
I'm not sure. I think he would be. He comes across as somebody who wouldn't be so easy to offend. I think, you know, no, seriously, because he's self-deprecating enough to kind of air out his
oh no, I think those people
insecurities
are
and so on.
worse.
Yeah.
I think so. Even like when he talks about being self-deprecating, he goes, you need to like, when you meet someone and you want to like date them, you need to like tell them all your flaws so that they can't be the first one to tell them to you. That's not a person who would deal well with criticism.
Right.
If he feels like he needs to tell you everything that's wrong with him so you can never throw anything in his face.
Okay.
I get the impression that actually he can't handle
That
criticism.
Okay.
But maybe that's just the way I read it. But I was just like how do you? He was just like, yeah, you have to tell them all your flaws, and I was just like, that's not a good way to start a date or anything, to be honest.
No.
But yeah.
In terms of the collection of these books, I really enjoyed this one because I think it's unique in that it's one of the ones where you really get an insight into what it's like to be a celebrity. So, for example, you know, people come up and, you know, wanting to cook for you and, you know, getting sent free things like the influencers. Influencers don't pay for their own clothes these days, you know, they get sent things. So it gives an indication of what it's like to be in that position. My only thing is I think there should have been a change in his life that kind of reflected that he knew that he could do better.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I agree. Given that he wrote this after he'd been shot for not
He'd been shot?
He'd been shot, so like a feminist, this like quite extreme feminist shot him.
Okay.
And I felt like I think there's probably some stuff around feeling quite hard done by. She'd worked with him a few times as well, and so clearly they had a working relationship that wasn't very good. And like, you're not a good boss if someone comes back to shout you. Like, I feel like that's an indication that you're not a good boss.
You
but
say
probably,
that about Versace as well.
but I think the thing I liked about the book actually is that it was a stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
Like, he would say something like really random in the middle of a rant about something else and just move on to another topic. It doesn't feel like it was edited or anything. It just feels like you spent a few hours with Andy Warhol and he just like let whatever was in his mind come out, and that was quite interesting. It felt unfiltered, and so I really like that about the book. And that's probably the thing that I enjoyed most. It felt really honest and not overly framed.
Okay, I like that. And just a final comment: how do you rate his skill level in terms of his actual artistic ability?
I can't decide whether sometimes Warhol is hype or Warhol is a genius.
Okay.
And I almost wonder if that's what you want as an artist, right? Like because this man drew a can of beans and made everyone interested in a can of beans. And if you can make everyone interested in a can of beans, then who am I to say you're not a good artist?
Okay. But fair beans, I can't complain about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. That has been Andy Warhol's Fame.